Now it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jim told me he wanted me to do something with appendages, and I thought, well, that's going to go downhill real fast. So then we decided to do feet and spouts and handles. And the reason why I got started doing handles and spouts is my mother asked me to make a teapot. And I thought, I can't make a teapot. And of course, your mother thinks you can do anything. So I gave it some thought. I gave it some thought, and I decided, well, what I'll do is I'll turn it this way, and I'll leave a ring all the way around, and then I'll carve off that ring all except for the spout. Well, that was a lot of work. And I said, well, I'll never do that again. I'm not going to make another teapot. And I went ahead and did some bent wood handles, and that's what I ended up with. So a couple of months later, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, if you did something that on 2 axes, instead of multi-axes like Barbara Dill does, I was just going to do 2. You could probably do a spout. So a couple nights later, I woke up and thinking, well, if you can do a spout, you can do a handle. So I decided, well, I'm going to try to do something with a spout and a handle. And I eventually worked around until I came up with a teapot. With a spout and a handle. And then I got to thinking, well, why not add feet to it?
Where's the kitchen?
Sorry, I got
I think you need to take a sleeping pill.
I go to sleep fine. It's waking me up in the middle of the night. It's that subconscious thing. So I did handle, spout, and feet.
Wow. Next.
And that's as far as I've gotten.
Rats.
We were hoping for more.
But if you can do a spout and a handle, you can do 2 handles. Or you can do 2 spouts. You could do a lot of different things with it. So I'm going to describe the process that I've come up with to do a teapot with an integral spout and handle. So the trick to this is laying it out and figuring out how you're going to hold the piece to do all these things and what's the proper sequence of doing it. And it's also a challenge to get it symmetrical the way I do it. And I'm sure somebody smarter can come up with a different way. And I'll pass this around, but this is the layout from where I've laid one out. And you'll notice I haven't drawn a complete circle. I've bisected my circle at different places. And I've also drawn my circle below the center line. And I do that because I've got to leave an area here to hold the piece. And since I'm going to do feet, I'll cut a recess to hold it on my 4-chuck jaw. And then I'll come back and carve off parts of that rims and leave the feet. So when I'm laying it out, I've got to be cognizant. I've got to be left with enough room here to cut my recess and to hold the piece. And if I start below the center line, it gives me more room to work with. So I'll lay it out, I'll draw my circle, and I've drawn my line all the way around, because that's important to have this line symmetrical all the way around when you're turning on different axes. You've always got to come back to that line. And then I'll kind of approximate where I want my handle, where I want my spout and where I want my handle. And since I'm going to drill this spout, I'm going to cut a tenon here to hold it to drill the spout. So that's why I have a straight line here. That's where my tenon will be to hold the piece of the drill spout. So once I've laid it out, and if you want to pass that around, I'll go back to my bandsaw And I'll cut it where it looks like this. And I've gone ahead and cut off part of my spout, some of the excess material, make it a little bit easier to turn. Stan asked me why I didn't go ahead and cut off the excess on the handle. Well, the reason why I don't do that at this point is because I'm going to cut into my area where I need a tendon to hold it for drilling the spout. So I basically go to my bandsaw and rough it out, leave a square area for the tendon, area for the spout. And at this point, what I'll do is I will, after I cut it out of the bandsaw, I'll mount it like this. And I'll cut my tenon. So I'll cut my tenon here. And I'll flip it around, put it on my 4-jaw chuck, and I'll mount it like this, and I'll drill the spout, and I'll turn the spout. And this gets the challenge when you're holding it like this and drilling it and turning it, is getting your tool. I do not have a short tool rest. So getting your tool rest in here and where you can work it without maneuvering around and getting everything around is a challenge for me. If I bought a shorter tool rest, it'd probably be a lot easier. But I'll basically mount it like that, and I'll drill it with a Jacob's chuck. Then I'll go down and I'll turn down this area here and make my spout circular. After I do that, I'll go back to the bandsaw and then cut off the excess for the handle. And I'll go ahead and trim that up a little bit there just so I don't have as much cutting to do on the leg. So, any questions so far?
What size block did you start with?
I start with whatever I got. It's usually the minimum I can usually do is like 4.5 by 4.5. But the bigger the better. It gives you more room to not cut off your holding areas. So here's one where I have turned the handle, and I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking it through. I put my spout right in the heart of the wood, right where it's going to crack. So you'll see this is a little bit cracked, but I'm going to go ahead and probably finish it since the handle stayed on while I was doing it. But in this, I have just a little stub here for the handle, but by the time you turn it down, you're going to have more room to work and a bigger handle to work with it. So after I've turned my spout, turned and drilled my spout, and I've gone ahead and drilled a hole here for mounting a worm screw. But I will usually go back and forth. I'll mount it this way. And I'll turn this into a circle. And I will generally draw a circle in the bottom where my rim will be for my feet and for my recess for holding it on the chuck. So I'll have a rim here, and I'll draw a circle so I'll know not to cut that off. But I usually will end up cutting a little bit off, but I'll adjust for that when I put the worm screw in to do the top. But I'll go ahead and turn this side circular. Then I'll flip it around, do this side, and I'm trying to keep it as even as possible. And that's part of the challenge, is keeping that as even as possible so you don't have a real lopsided bowl or teapot or whatever. I mean, if you're really into wanting something that's perfectly symmetrical, I don't know how to do it, but I try to get as close as I can. So, any questions at this point?
Could you do that if you made a template? Cut out a template out of plexiglass or...
I've tried to do that. I tried to do that with saying, my thought process was, well, if I do a perfect sphere, it'll work out, but I can never get it quite right. Because, and the reason why I can't get it quite right is I can never get my points exactly where I need them to be for everything to match up. Now, if I had a perfectly true square piece of stock and I measured precisely and mounted it precisely, maybe I could. But I'm more of a seat of the pants kind of guy, so
Wing it.
I wing it a lot.
Does any part of that become the lid or the top of the teapot?
Well, usually when that block I passed around,
Yeah.
I'll save a piece of what I've cut off to make the lid.
Keep the bands off.
Yeah.
Do you write down, do you go by steps? Do you write down, have a list of steps?
Yeah, I've got I wrote up a handout that Bob's going to put in the newsletter, and it sort of steps it through. And I put some photos in there and everything to try to lay it out. Because I did a lot of brain twisting and experimenting to get it in the steps that works for me. Now, once I've rounded these sides, I generally don't have them where they're going to be the final stage. So I usually go back and forth. I'll go here, and I'll cut my recess, and I'll shape the bottom up to where my handle is going to start. And when I shape the bottom, then that will generally show me if I've got one side a little wider than the other or a little narrower than the other. So then I'll go back and remount it this way and adjust the sides to get it more symmetrical. And pass that around. So then I'll end up with this. You see I've got my mounting points, and I've left my mounting points on here. Sometimes I'll end up, as I'm doing the bottom, cutting those off. I've got my recess, I've got my ring, I've got my spout, and I've got my handle.
The tenon becomes your feet?
The tenon becomes my feet. And I'll get to that in just a second.
You woke up one night and you decided to go segment. Just checking.
Well, I didn't wake up on that one. That one was looking around the shop and saying, hey, I don't have a piece of wood. So I glued up a piece of wood. And I don't know what kind of top I'll put on that. I've been scratching my head what kind of top I'll put on that.
African blackwood.
That might work. But you can see it's not perfectly round, and it's not perfectly matched, but it's about as close as I can get it. Usually I've got more of a ridge in one place or the other, and you can see some ridges up here where I've turned the top down. So, I'll turn the bottom up and try to blend it in as much as I can, and I'll turn the top down as far as I can without cutting off my spout or my handle, and try to blend that in as much as I can. But I'm going to end up with quite a bit of sanding work to do. I'll pass this around in a minute and you'll see. But I'll leave these mounting points on here for as long as I can in case I do need to go back and adjust something or make some tweaks. But after I've put my worm screw in it, mounted it this way, turned my recess, and shake the bottom, I'll flip it around, and I'll mount it with my four-jaw chuck, and I'll hollow it out. And because all the various mountings and with the things sticking out, finding the way to get your tool in there and controlling your tool, this can be a bit of a challenge. And my go-to tool for a lot of the outside shaping is and I've ground this down to where I just about need a new one, is a 3/8 inch fingernail bowl gouge. And the point will help you get in there into those areas. When you're trying to get up close to your handle or close to your spout, And so I'll do most of the shaping with this. And then when I do the hollowing, I'm not the greatest hollower in the world, but I use the Easy Wood tools. And then I have a Sorby tool for the final finishing pass. But this is the EWT1, and I think this is a 2. And then this is the Sorby tool. And they have I've bought the woodpecker cutting heads, which I don't think they're carbide, and I get a little better finished cut with those.
Steel.
Yeah, it's steel, and seems to be a little bit sharper and cut a little bit cleaner. So after I've gotten into this stage, I'll go back and I'll mount it back on my 4-yaw chuck, and I'll start doing some power sanding with a disc sander and a drill. And I'll drill holes in the handle so I can start hollowing out the handle. And I use, a Fordham tool or a Dremel tool or whatever to start shaping that up. I can drill a series of holes and cut it out with a coping saw, and then go back with a little sanding disc and everything else to clean that up. And so I'll just keep working it around, and I'll chisel this off and leave a little bit of excess so I can blend it in and sand it in. And I've left these protruding because, of course, you've got your points on your centers that you don't want in your final piece. So, and then, after I've done all that sanding, I'll come back and I'll lay out my feet. And this one I've decided to do 3 feet on. So I've got a little circle template, and I'll locate where I want my feet placed. I'll draw a circle on there. And then I'll take a coping saw and I'll cut a relief cut on each side of each foot. And then I'll start carving that excess away and rounding my feet and make my feet that way. So, I looked at this way without sanding so you can see how difficult it is to get the various sides lined up. Well, it's difficult for me. Some of you other guys probably do it a lot easier. So,
Cody, when you're all said and done, how many hours does it take you to go from a block of wood to mother's happy with it?
this piece here, it probably took me, and this is obviously not the first time I did it. It probably took me 3-4 hours to get it to that shape. Then it'll take me another 3 or 4 more to get it to this shape. So there's a lot of time in it.
Less than that.
Yeah, so. I probably went through this a lot faster than I should have. But, I'll pass this around, but the lid is loose on this, so the lid will fall off. And you can, like the first one I passed around, that was just a glued up block of poplar. I just took a poplar board, cut it up, and glued it up because it's best to use seasoned wood with this. You can use wet wood, and I personally don't mind cracks and it warping a little bit. I kind of like the character that gives it. But if you want to just take if you just want to glue up some boards, and then you can apply embellishing techniques to it or whatever. And the one that I passed around first was that Copper Effects and Metal Effects paint.
Is that a poly finish on there?
Yeah, it's poly over shellac. I bought a can of shellac without paying attention, and when I Opened it up, put it on there, I thought, man, that's a funny color. It was amber shellac, but I just wasn't paying attention when I bought it. I thought I was buying clear shellac. So it's an amber shellac over maple.
Does she use it, or is it decorative?
It's decorative. I would be afraid if you put hot liquids or anything like that in it, it's gonna crack or swell. And maybe you could put some sort of epoxy finish on it or something, but I'd be afraid to. I wouldn't want to do it, with heavy use anyway. Oh, maybe I didn't pass it around, or did I?
No.
I'm sorry. That's the copper effect.
All right, don't let it happen.
Yeah.
Are you working on these
But you don't have, you don't have to put spouts on them. You can make a cup. So this is a cup. And that's basically going through the same process, except not having spouts. And surprisingly, for me, that was just as hard to do as the teapot. For some reason, I couldn't get that in my head. But you could do 2 handles. You could do 2
What do
spouts.
you make it here, a smudge pot?
So I'm thinking about trying to do like a Navajo wedding jug with 2 spouts. But I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do that yet.
Take a long nap.
That's probably what I should do. But I brought these 2 bowls along just to show you sort of the effect of putting feet on things. That one doesn't have feet. And this one does. You'll have to decide for yourself whether it's worth the effort to carve feet or not. I think it adds a lot to it. And I did those feet the same way. When I'm going to do feet, I'll try to, when I cut my recess, make it a little concave and make it a little deeper than normal so that I can get the feet.
Cody, what do you use to carve out the rib to leave the feet?
A little bit of everything. It's just whatever I've got at hand. I've got one of those reciprocating carvers, so I'll do a lot of the rough work with that. And then I'll use like a round sanding disc either on a Dremel or a Fordham to go in and clean it up. And then I'll end up doing a lot of hand sanding. So the hand sanding is usually what adds the time to all of this, because you've got all those pieces you've got to sand around and do things with. As a wood carver, you could probably knock that out pretty easily. But
Do you usually go from a tenon to the feet?
no, I usually go from the recess, because the tenon to me leaves you too much material. So by cutting that circular recess, normally I would rather hold the bowl with a tenon, but if I'm going to do the feet, you end up like that with recess. That's not exactly round, but then I'll go in and locate my feet and basically take out that material after I've done everything I want to do with it mounted. But getting everything on the right line and getting the 2 axes centered up as much as you can. If you can get that, nail that really helps you get things to be more symmetrical. And so laying it out really is as much of the challenge as anything, and then figuring out how to hold it.
How much of that do you finish before you start the carving?
On the teapot, I'll do as much.
Look at the piece where you have right there. So you finish the inside, finish 2/3 of the outside, then you carve it.
When you say finish, sanding or
Sanding and
I usually don't apply the finish until I'm through sanding everything.
Then you can't turn it, you're sanding it, you're putting a finish on by hand.
Right. And you'll see my finish is a little rougher than, I'm not a finish guy. I mean, I'm just like, I'm more of a rustic guy. But my wife wants shine, so I'll try to make an effort of putting shine on these. I mean, for me, I'd slap some mineral oil on it and call it good.
I suggest cubic zirconia.
Give it some bling. Yeah, but I really think the feet add a lot to it. But, you know, that's really a matter of opinion than the feet. The feet means you're going to have a lot more time in the piece. So,
How do you go about finishing the inside of his hand? Taking that big block piece?
yeah, that's, you know, I'll mount it on the on my chuck, and then I'll basically drill holes around, and then I'll take a coping saw and cut out that, and then I'll come back with usually a round sanding disc on either a Dremel or a Fordham, and work it down that way. Now, I learned a very hard lesson. I'm new to having a Fordham, and I had one of those big burr circular cutters, and I stuck it down in that hole, and it twisted sideways, and I had to end up buying a new shaft for the Fordham. So I learned that's not the way to do it. Yeah. So. Well, that's really all I have prepared. So, you know, unless you have more questions or what.
So if you made your blanks exactly square, would that eliminate or reduce the possibilities of being off?
Yeah, it would. I mean, if you look at that first block I passed around, my bandsaw blade was a little bit dull, so you know, it's got some waves in it. It's not perfectly square. And, you know, so getting a true line, square line all the way around where it's always even.
No, as far as laying it out, the blocks themselves, making those like 5.5 inches, 5.5 to 5.5, make sure those are exact. And that way you can do your layouts and you can carry your lines around.
Yeah, but that to me is not as much of the issue as getting everything on the right line.
Okay.
And then when you're coming in from the two sides, coming in the same distance from the center. You know, and that's with the handle and the spout. It's hard to know you're coming in exactly to the center, and I haven't found a good way to measure that, so I kind of eyeball it. And, you know, when you're eyeballing it, you're not going to get as precise as you.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to tell anyways. I mean, look at it and
Yeah. Well, if you look at it closely enough, you can see it's.
who cares, yeah.
And if you look at the wall thickness where it's hollowed, it's not going to be uniform wall thickness everywhere. You know, I mean, when I'm hauling it with the two mounting places on it, I don't know how exactly how thick my wall is there anyway, so I tend to make it a little thicker because I know I'm going to be sanding those off, and I don't want to sand into it. So.
Where do you get access to your handout?
It'll be in the newsletter.
It's also on the website. In the menu, there's an element called resources, and that'll take you to where you can download a PDF of just the handout. You know, the newsletter may have some more information from what you've talked about tonight, but anyway, you can get that PDF there now.
Oh, wow.
You see, you already put it up.
Talk more about how you drill the hole for the
Spigot?
for the spigot. I know you got the flat plate, you got the flat side. How do you mount the flat side? Are you mounting it in your chuck and then you're drilling it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the piece with the tenon back up here, but we're doing it. So imagine that it still has a tenon here.
It's got a tenon on it. You turn a tenon on that side.
Yeah, and then so I'll mount it on the chuck, and then I'll use it.
There you go.
So, you know, I will have turned a tenon here. You know, I'm sorry, am I moving
No,
around
you're
too
good. I
much?
lost you for a second.
So I'll turn a tenon on here, and then I'll mount that tenon in my chuck.
Gotcha.
You know, and I'll center it up, and then I'll just use the Jacob's chuck and drill into it. And I'll drill it before I turn it. Because, you know, that's usually where you end up going wrong, is turning the spouts. So if you do that early on, then you're not wasting a lot of work. So then I'll drill it, and I'll turn it down, and of course you've got this ridge here that makes the turning a little bit of a challenge. So I'll go ahead and turn it down and round the tenon. And you can make it, if you want to make it a bigger diameter back at the base, you can do that while you're turning. And when I drill it, I'll drill all the way deep enough to I know where I'm going to hollow into where I've drilled.
Sure.
So
Do you use the spout for remounting it at all? I mean,
no,
I was gonna say it looks kind of, yeah.
no, I don't. I mean, that's about,
Too thin.
I'm done with it at this point. Yeah, I
The
mean,
point is just taking it like that.
yeah. So I mean, at this point, of course, I have this one. I have a hole for the worm screw, and I've gone back and forth. Sometimes I'll go ahead and turn the recess and shape a little bit of the bottom, just to kind of give me a guide for when I'm turning the sides. Sometimes I'll turn the side and then go back and do that, and then go back. So I haven't quite figured out which is the best sequence to do that. And like I say, I'm going back and forth generally to get things evened up. But I will, you know, after I've drilled the spout, I'll go ahead and mount it just like this. And then I'll come in here and start working down the side. So it's turning like that, and so I'm going to start rounding it down to where from where my handle and the spout start to here. So I'm going to round it here, and I'll go down to my spouts and handle, flip it over, and I'll do the other side. Yeah.
Robert would want to make sure that you talk some about how you look at different speeds as you go through the process.
Somebody else asked me that
Just where it's
question.
comfortable or what?
Yeah, it's usually where it's comfortable. On my lathe, I have steps programmed, and I'll generally do a lot of this at about 800 RPMs. But then when I'm trying to get it smoother and finish it, I'll step it up to like 1500. So, but you know, with these pieces flying around, you know, you got to worry about your appendages. I've got a few skint knuckles. So, and the you know, like I said, with a long tool rest, is getting in there close. Because I'll run out of travel in my tailstock without being able to get my tool rest far enough back to where I can get into it and get close. So I really do need to invest in a shorter tool rest.
Has anybody else in the group here tried to turn a teapot? And if so, do you do it any different? I was wondering, maybe like in England, you do it, you turn the teapot?
No, I've seen people.
You know, I saw a teapot in American Wood Turner. It was Trent Bosch's daughter. And it looked like to me she probably turned it, you know, on one axis with the spout, and then come back somehow or other and shaved off the bottom is what it looked like she did. But I don't know. I was curious. She didn't have a handle on it like these do. So I don't know. I haven't really seen anybody, how anyone else does it that has
Some
it.
just have a knob for the handle, so that would be easier to do as far as turning it on when access.
Yeah, it would definitely be easier. And
I've seen handballs sort of turn from a circle, you know, and then split. And
Oh, right, yeah, you see some people stick them on later, but.
yeah,
stuck on.
come back and glue them on. And you know what I was trying to do was do it all as one integral piece. You know, you probably can get a lot cleaner finished looking piece by gluing it on and everything. But
I think spokes have been fitted that way as well.
I'm sorry.
I think spokes have been fitted that way as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Cody, I know you mentioned the handout, but isn't there also a video of you doing some of this in the club or floating around?
Not that I'm aware
I
of.
thought you did. Didn't you do, when Brady did his thing, you didn't do something?
During
No.
the challenge.
During the challenge, I did a demo, but I don't.
Wasn't
If
it?
it was videotaped, I'm
Okay.
not aware of it.
Okay.
So. No, I probably doing it with me. I probably would have broken the camera pretty early on.
Maybe you should do one.
That spalted wood you had, that seems fairly dense and harder than most spalted wood I see. Where did that come from?
The one I passed around.
Yeah.
I went to my parents back in the spring, and they had a magnolia tree that had broken in a storm, and they wanted it taken down. So it came out of that magnolia
So
tree.
it's magnolia that's spalted.
Yeah, it's magnolia. Yeah. And the maple one I passed around, or the maple completed piece, that was one from, got that from Don. That was one of the forest project pieces of wood.
Good job.
Anything else?
I liked your little top on that one lid that you have sitting back there with black.
Yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
That was my first attempt at bending wood. I basically just turned it uniform, cut it at a little bit of an angle, then made myself, took a piece of 2x4, cut a curve in it, put it in a bottle, steam. You know, I steamed it for 15 or 20 minutes and then clamped it between two blocks and then painted it. So that was real simple.
What kind of wood does that start with?
I don't remember. It may have been maple.
Okay, probably.
Yeah.
Or oak.
No, I wasn't oak. And I broke one or two before I got it right. I didn't steam it enough to begin with. But that was my first attempt at steam bending something. So.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Cody. Very much.